The Mindbreaker's challenge, the Galactic Council chamber, was built to inspire fear and obedience. Its walls curved upward in endless silver arches, and its floors shone with the light of 100 worlds gathered together. Delegates of every great empire filled the seats, their voices hushed as they looked at the figure standing in the center. She was called Serenia, the Mindbreaker. Her reputation carried across galaxies. Entire fleets had fallen because their commanders could not withstand her psychic assault. She was a weapon and a judge all in one, a living proof of the superiority of her species. The council had summoned her to test the one creature that no one fully understood, the human. The man stood alone within the circle of light, his posture calm, his hands at his side. He was not armored nor enhanced in any visible way. His body looked as frail as any alien rumor claimed humans were weak, fragile, and bound by their death world origins. The council believed that one decisive strike into his mind would shatter him. Serenia believed it too. She had done this countless times to far greater beings. She looked upon him and saw prey. The human's name was Daniel, though in the council chamber they did not care for his name. Only for what he represented. Earth had been a curiosity, a world on the edge of mapped space, ignored for centuries, until its ships began to appear, until its soldiers walked unafraid on planets where others needed full armor, until its scientists unlocked engines no one had imagined, and now the council whispered in fear of what they did not control. Serenia stepped forward, her presence heavy. She spoke in a voice that pressed against the minds of everyone around her. "I will show you the weakness of this human mind," she declared. "You will all see how fragile they truly are." Her words carried no doubt. For her kind, to bend a mind was as simple as bending a reed in water. She turned her gaze upon Daniel, and his eyes did not waver. His face showed no fear, only quiet patience. The chamber's energy shifted as Serenia closed her eyes. Her form shimmered with psychic power. The walls vibrated with the pressure of her will. She reached across the divide and cast herself into his mind, expecting to find a fragile structure easy to splinter. What she found instead stunned her for a moment. She had entered countless alien minds before, and they always carried the same shape. Simple, fragile patterns of thought. But the human's mind was vast. It was like stepping into a storm made of lightning and thunder. The ground beneath her was not solid, but shifting 1,000 memories, 1,000 emotions overlapping and intertwining. It was chaos, and yet it was also harmony. She took a step deeper, convinced that it was only illusion. The first image rose before her eyes, a battlefield under dark skies, humans running through mud, smoke filling the air, weapons firing death all around, and yet none of them broke. They pushed forward with fire in their eyes. Serenia felt the echo of their determination, and for a brief instant her footing wavered. She steadied herself and tried again, shaping the storm into order, trying to find the core where she could break the man's will. But every path led deeper into more storms, more memories. The council chamber outside grew tense. The delegates whispered to one another. They had expected the human to fall instantly, yet the Mindbreaker's lips twisted in concentration, sweat forming along her temples. Daniel's eyes were still calm, his chest rising slowly with each breath. He was letting her in, as if daring her to go deeper. Serenia snarled in frustration. She summoned her full strength, crafting chains of thought, illusions of terror, mountains of despair designed to crush his consciousness. She hurled them at Daniel's mind, expecting screams, expecting collapse. Instead, she heard a sound that shook her more than any resistance. Laughter, soft at first, then growing louder. A human's laughter. Inside his own mind, facing the storm she had created and mocking it, she felt the echo vibrate through her power, unraveling her illusions. Serenia recoiled, confused. No one had ever laughed inside their own mind under her assault. She tried again, conjuring a nightmare from his deepest fears. But the nightmare turned back on her. She saw flashes of history, humanity facing extinction again and again, yet surviving. She felt the cold of space, the fire of wars, the endless hunger of death worlds. And through it all, humans endured. Daniel's presence grew stronger, not weaker, and his eyes never moved from hers. She realized then that she had stepped into something beyond her control. The council watched in silence, their fear mounting. Serenya's reputation had never been questioned until now. The human stood unbroken, and she could feel her own certainty beginning to slip. She gritted her teeth, forcing more power into the struggle, while Daniel simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that made the chamber's air grow heavy. Thus began the first cracks in Serenya's belief. The mind-breaker who had shattered thousands of minds was discovering that the human mind was not fragile at all. It was something else, something vast and unyielding, and she had only taken her first step into its depths, into the human's mindscape. Serenya pressed deeper into the human's consciousness, determined to prove her mastery. She would not allow this strange resistance to tarnish her name. She had been raised from birth to dominate the minds of others, trained until her every thought could become a weapon. Entire civilizations had bowed before her will, and yet this one man stood in defiance. She could not accept it. She summoned more strength and cast herself fully into his mindscape, tearing away the boundaries that separated her from him. In an instant, the council chamber was gone. She stood in a new reality, one woven entirely from Daniel's thoughts. It was not like any mind she had walked before. Instead of a fragile hall of memory, she found herself in a vast landscape that stretched beyond sight. Mountains rose and fell. Rivers of light coursed endlessly. Skies shifted through storms of fire and ice. The very air hummed with energy, a force that seemed alive. Her first instinct was to impose order. She raised her hand, shaping the environment, forcing it into rigid walls and corridors where she could hunt him down. But each wall crumbled into dust the moment it was formed. Each corridor dissolved into endless paths. Humans, she realized, were not creatures of order alone. They thrived in chaos, and Daniel's mind was the very image of that truth. As she walked through the storming landscapes, visions rose before her. A child, running through a burning village carrying his sibling through smoke and ash. Soldiers locked in combat, their bodies broken, yet their spirits unbent. A scientist working by candlelight, while the world outside starved, refusing to give up until the solution was found. These were not illusions meant to frighten her. They were memories, echoes of a people who had lived and suffered and endured every trial. She tried to brush them away, but the harder she fought, the more they came rising like waves, overwhelming her attempts to contain them. In the distance, she saw Daniel himself. He stood upon a peak that seemed to pierce the sky, his figure wrapped in shadow and light. His eyes were not hostile, yet not welcoming either. They regarded her like one might regard a storm, inevitable, powerful, and beyond control. She tried to strike him, reaching out with psychic tendrils designed to seize his will and bend it, but the moment her power touched him, it unraveled as if she had grasped lightning. With bare hands, the backlash sent her staggering, the ground shaking beneath her. Serenya refused to falter. She clenched her fists and summoned her strongest illusions. She conjured prisons of fire, chains that could bind the soul, mountains of despair that could bury hope. She had used these countless times to crush the proudest warriors, the most stubborn leaders. No one had ever resisted them. But here in this human mind, they did not hold. Instead, the chains melted like wax. The prisons turned to ash, the mountains split apart as if some unseen force shattered them from within. She heard again that laugh, not cruel but steady and unshaken, a sound that gnawed at her certainty. Around her, the storms grew fiercer. The skies above tore open, with thunderbolts, and each strike carried with it fragments of human history. She saw the rise and fall of empires painted in fire across the heavens. She saw explorers crossing oceans in fragile ships, facing storms that should have killed them, yet surviving. She saw mothers carrying children across wastelands, fathers working until their hands bled, warriors standing against impossible odds. The weight of it pressed down on her, and she felt her own knees weaken. The council, watching from the outside, grew restless. They could see her body trembling, her face locked in concentration and strain. They could not see what she saw, but they could sense the disturbance. They whispered in shock. Could the Mindbreaker be failing? Could a human resist her? They looked at Daniel, whose body stood perfectly still, his expression calm and his heartbeat steady. Serenia gasped as she forced herself upright. She screamed into the storm, demanding obedience, demanding that the human yield. Her power lashed out across the landscape, ripping mountains apart, boiling rivers and burning forests. She poured everything she had into breaking him. Yet even as the world cracked around her, Daniel did not move. Instead, the shattered fragments reformed into something greater: new mountains rising, stronger rivers flowing faster, forests growing denser. It was as if destruction only gave birth to renewal. She began to understand something terrifying. The human mind was not built to be perfect or invulnerable. It was built to adapt to chaos, to suffer collapse and then rebuild stronger than before. Every attack she made only fed the cycle. Every chain she cast became another lesson, another spark of resilience. She realized then why he left. He was not resisting her in the way others did. He was simply being human, and that was something her power could never erase. Sweat poured down her face, her breath ragged. Her once flawless control began to fray. She could feel the vastness of Daniel's mind pressing back against her, pushing her toward the edges of his consciousness. The more she struggled, the more she felt herself being drawn into the depth of his being, not as a conqueror, but as an intruder, unworthy to walk these halls of memory and fire. She had thought she came to break him. Instead, she stood at the edge of being consumed. For the first time in her long career, Serenia felt fear. She looked into the distance at Daniel's form upon the peak, and she understood that she was not standing inside the mind of prey, but within the heart of a force that could never be subdued. The fracturing of control. Serenia had never known the feeling of her own power slipping away. Her entire life had been built upon the certainty that no mind could resist her, and yet here in the human storm she felt herself unraveling piece by piece. She clenched her fists, forcing her strength to surge again, pulling on every reserve of energy her kind had gifted her. She was the Mindbreaker. She reminded herself she was Serenia, feared across 100 systems. Yet the more she repeated it, the more hollow the words felt against the roar of Daniel's mind. The storms around her raged with increasing force, thunder and fire colliding in ways that made no sense, yet held a strange order of their own. Each bolt of lightning illuminated fragments of humanity's essence. She saw great towers built only to fall. She saw inventions that reshaped entire worlds. She saw faces of countless men and women who lived brief lives but burned with a determination that dwarfed centuries of alien rulers. She tried to shut them out, but they pushed into her thoughts relentless. She unleashed her most terrible weapon, illusions crafted not only from her imagination, but stolen from the fears of her victims. She reached deep, pulling at the hidden corners of Daniel's consciousness, searching for dread, for weakness, for that one memory that would bring him to his knees. Yet what she found shocked her. Instead of fear, his mind gave her the image of humanity's darkest hours. Entire cities reduced to ash bodies lying uncounted beneath gray skies, children crying in hunger, soldiers buried in nameless graves. She tried to wield these horrors against him, but something shifted. The horrors did not break him, they defined him. They were not chains, but the very fire that forged his resilience. Serenia staggered as the illusions backfired, crashing into her own thoughts. She felt the hunger of children. She felt the grief of mothers. She felt the weight of soldiers who fought until their last breath. Her knees buckled and she gasped, unable to tear the images away from her heart. Her own strength was betraying her. She could no longer tell where her mind ended and Daniel's began. Daniel stood unyielding, his presence like a mountain rooted against every storm. His eyes met hers, not with hatred but with a kind of pity that cut deeper than any weapon. It was the look of someone who understood suffering so completely that no terror could bend him. He did not strike her, he did not push her away. He simply stood there and let her feel everything, and in doing so she realized that she was the one being shattered. Outside the chamber, the council erupted in unease. Their whispers turned to panic. Their greatest weapon was faltering before a single human. A delegate slammed his clawed hand against the railing, demanding that Serenia finish it. Another shouted that the human must be destroyed at once, but none dared to intervene. For the duel of minds was sacred, and to interrupt would be to admit weakness. Inside the storm, Serenia screamed, her voice trembling with desperation. She threw everything she had left into the battle rivers of psychic firestorms of despair, waves of crushing pressure. She hurled them again and again until her body shook with exhaustion. But each wave broke upon Daniel like water against stone. Each flame was extinguished by his calm, each chain shattered before it could bind. She realized that she was no longer attacking him but herself, every strike tearing deeper into her own confidence, every effort exposing her own fragility. And then came the moment she could not deny. Her own vision cracked. She looked down at her hands and saw them trembling not with effort but with fear. She saw the walls of her power splintering like glass. She had thought she was the one tearing into his mind, but it was his presence that was dismantling her piece by piece. Daniel did not need to attack. He only needed to endure. And in doing so, he was showing her that endurance was stronger than domination. Her breath caught as she heard voices rising, not from him but from within the storm surrounding her. They were voices of humanity across ages, chanting, screaming, laughing, crying. Each voice carried weight. Each voice pressed against her mind until she could no longer hear her own thoughts. She tried to silence them, but their unity was too great. They were not a single man. They were an entire species speaking through him. The storm reached a peak. The sky split open with light that poured across the landscape, and Serenia fell to her knees. Clutching her head, she had lost control. Her illusions were gone, her power fractured, her title of Mindbreaker meant nothing here. She looked up at Daniel, and for the first time in her life she whispered words she never thought she would speak. "Cannot break you." And Daniel answered in a voice that carried like thunder, "You were never meant to." The human awakens, his quantum core. The chamber outside grew colder, though no one had touched the temperature controls. The delegates sat frozen as if some unseen force pressed down upon them. All eyes remained fixed on the two figures within the circle. Serenia trembling and pale, her body shivering with the weight of what she had seen, and Daniel standing still, unflinching like a sentinel carved from stone. His silence was more terrifying than any weapon because it told them he had not yet begun. Inside the mindscape. Serenia staggered to her feet, struggling to reclaim the fragments of herself. She could not allow this. She was the Mindbreaker, feared across empires. Her pride screamed that she must win, but her spirit knew the truth. She had already lost. Something inside the human was beyond her grasp, and she feared what might happen if he chose to unleash it. She felt his gaze upon her, heavy, not cruel but immense, like the weight of an ocean pressing against her small frame. Daniel finally moved, not in aggression, but in revelation. He raised his hand, and the storm around them shifted. The chaos that had seemed random before now aligned into patterns, stars appearing in the sky above. Yet they did not shine as normal stars. Instead, each one pulsed with strange rhythm, their light bending and splitting into countless threads. Serenia gasped because she recognized what she was seeing. This was not simply memory. This was quantum resonance. She was standing inside a mind that had reached into the very fabric of reality. The stars pulsed faster, until they formed constellations of events, overlapping timelines echoing one another. She saw versions of humanity across countless possibilities. In one they burned in nuclear fire, yet from the ashes they rebuilt. In another they spread across oceans of stars unchallenged. In yet another, they faced extinction and turned it into triumph. She saw history not as a single line but as infinite roads all connected by the same relentless will to endure. She stumbled back, her own understanding of mind and power crumbling. Daniel was not only human, he was a window into what humanity could become. The council felt the ripples, though they could not see what Serenia saw. Their heads throbbed with pressure. some delegates covering their ears as whispers filled the air. Whispers in human voices speaking in tongues they could not understand. Some swore the walls themselves were bending. Others claimed to see shadows of human figures walking among them. The chamber was unraveling beneath the weight of one man's consciousness. Serenia screamed, "Stop, you will tear everything apart." But Daniel did not answer with words. Instead, he opened the core of his mind and light poured out, enveloping her. She was forced to see the truth. Humans were not bound by single lifetimes. They carried within them echoes of ancestors, of children unborn, of histories written and rewritten. They were living conduits of possibility. They did not simply think within one world. They touched many. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed. Her own power seemed like a candle before a blazing sun. She had believed herself to be the master of thought. But compared to him, she was a child playing with shadows. The fear that gripped her was not fear of death, but fear of irrelevance. If one human could do this, what could an entire species achieve? The thought sent terror through her chest. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of universes. "I am not your enemy, Serenia. I am only showing you what you tried to break." His words wrapped around her not like chains, but like truths that could not be denied. She looked into his eyes and saw no malice, only clarity, a vision of what it meant to be human. She understood then that her task had been doomed from the beginning. She had stepped into a place where her power could never hold outside the chamber. Panic spread across the delegates. Some shouted that the duel must be stopped before the human destroyed the chamber itself. Others argued that this was proof humans could never be allowed to live. Some sat silent, trembling, as if witnessing the birth of something ancient. They realized too late that they were no longer in control. Humanity was not their subject. Humanity was becoming their fear. Serenia bowed her head, tears mixing with sweat. She whispered to herself words she had never said in all her years of victory. "I see now. I see what you are." Daniel placed his hand upon her shoulder, not in conquest, but in recognition. "You sought to shatter me," he said quietly. "But the truth is, it is your world that is breaking." She shivered because she knew he was right. Her empire, her council, her beliefs. Everything she had stood upon was beginning to crack, and as she looked into the storm of stars still swirling in his mind, she realized that the galaxy itself would never be the same. Shattered worldview. Serenia knelt upon the shifting ground of the human's mindscape, her body shaking not from wounds, but from the unbearable weight of revelation. She had entered expecting to dominate, to rip apart the fragile threads of his thoughts and expose him as weak. Now she understood that she had only walked into a storm that no power could master. She had been called the mind-breaker across empires, yet now she was the one who felt broken. Every belief that had carried her through her life shattered like glass beneath the force of Daniel's presence. She tried to speak, but her words failed. Every memory of her victories seemed meaningless compared to what she had seen in him. She thought of the countless enemies she had unmade with a single thought, and she realized that none of them had been truly strong. They had all been bound by fear, by weakness, by their need to cling to the illusion of control. But here was a human who carried no such illusion. He did not cling to control. He carried chaos within him and thrived because of it. Daniel descended from the peak of his mindscape, his steps calm, as though gravity itself bent. To his will, Serenia lifted her eyes to him and saw no conqueror, only a man who carried the burden of his people's history. She saw the wars, the inventions, the endless struggle reflected in his gaze, and it humbled her more than any weapon could. She whispered, "Why do you not destroy me?" He looked at her with steady patience. "Because that is not what we are," he replied. "You came to shatter my mind, but what you found was truth. Humanity cannot be shattered because we were born in storms. We do not break, we change, and in change we grow." Her heart trembled at those words because they carried the answers she had never wanted to face. Her empire had built itself upon domination. It had believed strength came from control, from bending others to its will. But humanity showed that strength came from enduring collapse and rising again. That was why she had failed. Her power had been a cage. Humanity was a horizon with no end. The council outside the chamber watched with terror their champion. The Mindbreaker bowed before the human. Their whispers filled the hall. What has she seen? What has he done to her? The delegates argued. Some demanded his immediate execution. Others feared even to speak. They knew what this meant. If the Mindbreaker could fall, then none of them were safe. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was a storm waiting to spread. Serenia rose unsteadily. Her legs weak, but her voice stronger than it had ever been. She turned to the council. Her eyes filled with something they had never seen in her before, not pride but conviction. You do not understand, she said, her words shaking but loud enough for all to hear. You brought me here to break him, but he is not the one who broke. It is us. It is everything we thought we knew. The chamber fell into silence, her words echoing like thunder. Daniel remained silent, but his presence was enough. His calm was more terrifying than rage, because it showed he did not need to prove anything. He had already won, not by force, but by endurance. Serenia placed her hand upon her chest and whispered, I was blind, but now I see. We thought ourselves masters, but we are children before them. Her declaration rippled through the chamber, striking every delegate with fear and doubt. One delegate of a reptilian empire hissed in anger. You are bewitched, he spat. You have let the human infect your mind. Serenia turned her gaze to him, and for the first time, her voice carried no arrogance, only truth. If he has infected me, then it is with vision. She lifted her hand toward Daniel. He is not bound by the limits we cling to. He carries within him the strength of every ancestor, every possibility. He is more than we can comprehend. The council erupted into chaos. Some shouted that she must be silenced. Some argued that she was telling the truth. For the first time in generations, unity among them fractured. The Mindbreaker's authority was gone, and with it their certainty. Daniel stood quietly watching as the seeds of doubt spread like wildfire. Through the chamber he did not need to speak, for the galaxy was already listening. Serenia looked back at him, and she felt something she had never felt before. Devotion, not out of fear but out of respect. Her old world was gone, shattered by the force of his being, and though it terrified her, it also gave her hope. She whispered so only he could hear, My world is broken, but perhaps it is better this way. He answered softly, Sometimes a world must break before it can truly live. In that moment, Serenia knew her future would no longer belong to the council or her empire. It would belong to the truth she had seen in the human mind, and she feared yet longed to see how far that truth would carry the galaxy. The council trembles. The chamber had fallen into chaos. The delegates who once spoke with unity now shouted over one another, their voices laced with panic and rage. Some cried that the human must be destroyed before his kind grew stronger. Others warned that any strike against Earth would unleash a war they could not win. The silence of Daniel in the circle only deepened their fear, because he stood unmoving like a shadow that could not be banished. His presence reminded them that they were no longer judges. They were prisoners of their own arrogance. Serenia stood at his side now, her eyes burning with clarity. She no longer cared for her reputation as the Mindbreaker. Her pride had been stripped away, leaving only truth. She raised her voice above the storm. You are fools if you believe you can destroy them, she declared. Humanity cannot be undone. They endure beyond collapse and rise stronger each time. Every world, every empire that has ever crushed them has only prepared them for the next storm. Her words struck like daggers, because deep inside the delegates knew she was right. A hulking delegate from the Vrax's dominion pounded his fist against the railing, spitting venom into the air. If what you say is true, then all the more reason to end them now. He turned, his reptilian eyes upon Daniel. We must strike at their world before they spread further. He called for a motion of war, but his voice was drowned by others who shouted in fear. What if they are already stronger than we know? What if what Serenia says is true? What if striking first ensures our ruin? The chamber grew darker as whispers filled every corner. The council was fracturing species against species, suspicion tearing at the fragile alliance they had built for centuries. For the first time in their long history, the presence of a single human had divided them more than any enemy fleet. Daniel finally moved, lifting his head to meet their stares. His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried into every ear. "You believe we are a danger?" he said. "You believe we must be destroyed because you fear what you do not understand." He paused, his gaze sweeping over them. "But if you strike at us, then you will learn too late that it is not humanity that will end. It is you." The words spread like fire in the chamber. Some delegates recoiled as though struck, others leaned forward in anger, but none could ignore him. The human had spoken not with threats, but with certainty. He was not bluffing, and they knew it. Serenia stepped closer to him, adding her voice, "I have seen what they are. I have felt it inside my very soul. If you bring war upon Earth, you will not win. You will burn yourselves into ashes before they break." Her declaration silenced many, but it also enraged others. One counselor shrieked that Serenia was corrupted, another demanded she be stripped of rank. The chamber guards moved uncertainly, unsure if they should act. Daniel simply watched as the powerful rulers of the galaxy trembled before the weight of their own fear. He did not need to move, for the storm was already spreading. In the shadows of the chamber, several smaller species exchanged glances. Some had long resented the council's dominance. They had suffered under decrees that favored the great empires and crushed the weak. Now they saw humanity not only as a threat but as a chance to challenge the order that had held them down. They whispered to one another in hushed tones. "If humanity rises, perhaps we rise with them. If the great empires fall, perhaps the age of fear ends." The larger empires sensed the shift and their panic deepened. They realized too late that humanity was not only a danger, but a symbol that could fracture their control from within. Already their unity was cracking, already their authority was being questioned, and it had all begun with one human standing unbroken in their chamber. Daniel's calm voice carried again. "You think in terms of conquest and survival," he said softly, "but you have never understood what it means to endure. You fear what we will become, but what you should fear is what you have already made us." He turned his gaze upon Serenia, who lowered her head in quiet acknowledgement. His words were not only a warning, they were a promise. The chamber fell into silence, heavy and suffocating. The delegates looked upon the human and saw not prey but prophecy. They trembled because the future they had long dismissed was now before them. The age of humanity was not coming. It had already begun. The human's final warning. The chamber was hushed as if the air itself had fled from the walls. Every delegate sat frozen, some with fear, some with rage, and some with dawning realization that the world they knew was already gone. At the center, Daniel stood with quiet strength beside Serenia, who had once been the mind-breaker but now looked like a prophet stripped of her illusions. The silence stretched until it pressed into the bones of everyone present, and then the human began to speak. "You called me here because you believed the human mind was weak. You believed we could be broken." He paused, his gaze steady across the hall. "You were wrong. We are not fragile. We are storms. We are fire. We are the weight of history, carried in flesh and blood, and we do not break." He stepped forward, and the lights in the chamber dimmed as if bending to the rhythm of his words. The delegates shifted uneasily, some gripping their seats, others whispering desperate pleas into private channels. Daniel raised his voice not in anger, but in a tone that cut sharper than any blade. "You think of survival as conquest. You think of power as control. But humanity does not endure through control. We endure through change, through loss, through the fire that consumes us only to leave steel behind. We do not fear the fall because we rise again each time stronger." Serenia felt his words flow through her like waves. She closed her eyes, remembering the storm of his mind, the infinite echoes of humanity. She knew that what he said was truth undeniable. She turned to the council and cried aloud, "Listen to him, for he speaks not as a conqueror, but as a warning. If you choose war, You choose your own annihilation." The chamber erupted into shouts, but they could not drown Daniel's voice. He walked slowly across the circle, each step resonating like a drumbeat. "You fear us because you do not understand us. But I give you this choice. Stand against us, and you will see the end of your empires. Stand with us, and you will learn what it means to endure." His words carried not arrogance but inevitability, and that truth chilled every creature present. A delegate of the insectoid Krail hive rose trembling. "We cannot allow you to live," she shrieked. "If we permit your kind to spread, there will be no place for us." Daniel turned his gaze upon her and she fell silent. His answer was calm. "If you try to erase us, you will find there is no weapon, no chain, no nightmare that can do so. We are already beyond your reach." His words struck like thunder and the chamber fell silent again. Serenia stepped closer to him, her voice strong with new conviction. She looked at the council and spoke with finality. "I stood against him. I used every power I had, and I failed. I failed not because I was weak, but because I had never faced truth before. The truth is that no one can break them. You must decide now whether to accept this truth or be destroyed by it." Her words echoed like prophecy, and none could deny them. Daniel raised his hand, and for a moment the chamber shook not from violence but from resonance. A shimmer spread across the air, as though reality itself bent to his will. Every delegate felt it, a glimpse of the storm within his mind, the quantum threads of possibility that bound him to past and future alike. They gasped, some in awe, some in terror, but all knew this was no mere human. This was the shape of what humanity truly was. He lowered his hand, and his final words carried across the chamber, as if carved into the very walls. "Do not mistake our silence for weakness. Do not mistake our patience for fear. If you strike us, we will rise. If you shatter us, we will return. If you burn our world, we will build another. And if you seek to end us, know this: you will fail, because humanity does not end. Humanity endures." Silence reigned after his words. Only the faint hum of the chamber remained. Delegates shifted nervously, none daring to speak. Some looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Others bowed their heads in quiet admission. Serenia stepped beside him, no longer his enemy but his witness. She whispered to him, though the chamber could still hear, "You have shattered my world. But in its ruins, I see something greater." He nodded once, his face calm but resolute. The council session ended not with a decision but with fear. Every empire left that hall carrying the weight of what they had seen. The Mindbreaker defeated, the council divided, and one human, standing unbroken. A story was already spreading across the stars, whispered from world to world. Never enter the mind of a human. Never seek to break them, for their minds are storms, and storms cannot be shattered. As Daniel walked from the chamber, Serenia followed at his side. Her old life was gone, her chains of arrogance destroyed, but she did not mourn. She had seen a new future, and though it terrified her, it also filled her with hope. The galaxy would tremble, and nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber stood in silence, long after Daniel and Serenia had left, their steps echoing down the endless halls of the council. Every delegate sat heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. No decree spoken, no alliance signed, for all knew that their galaxy had shifted in a way no law could contain. They had believed themselves rulers of stars, but now they feared they were only caretakers waiting for the storm of humanity to rise. The whispers began even before the chamber emptied, whispers that carried to every corner of known space. The Mindbreaker had fallen. The human had stood unbroken. The council had trembled. Serenia walked beside Daniel, her head lowered, not in defeat, but in acceptance. She had seen her world collapse within his mind, and from its ruins, she had been remade. She no longer carried the title of Mindbreaker, for titles meant nothing before truth. She was now a witness, a voice that would spread the warning across empires. She knew they would brand her traitor, but she no longer cared, because she had seen the future in his eyes, and it was unstoppable. Daniel did not speak as they walked, but his silence was louder than thunder. His presence carried the weight of countless histories, and Serenia felt it with each step. She realized he had not come to conquer. He had come only to show the galaxy what humanity truly was. Yet in showing them he had planted fear, greater than any weapon could. Humanity was no longer ignored. Humanity was no longer underestimated. They had become a legend. While still standing in the flesh, on distant worlds the story spread faster than light. Soldiers whispered it in barracks, traders repeated it in markets, scholars debated it in shadowed halls. The tale grew, with each telling a human who stood against the council, a human who shattered the strongest mind, a human who carried within him the storm of all that had come before. Empires shook as the idea grew, and hope bloomed in the hearts of the oppressed. The galaxy had been forced to face a truth it could never forget. Serenia looked at him one last time as the stars came into view beyond the chamber windows, and she whispered, not as an enemy, not as a conqueror, but as someone who finally understood. They will never break you. Daniel met her gaze with the quiet strength that had defeated her, and he answered softly, they will learn that breaking us was never an option, for we are humanity, and we endure. And so the legend began, carved into the memory of every species, a warning. Carried across the stars, never attempt to shatter the human mind, for in doing so you will only shatter your own world. The end.